Hi friends, I'm glad you could join me for another Bible story today. Only, today I'm not really going to tell you a story. You see, the Bible is a book, but it's a book made of lots of other books, and not every book is filled with stories. Some of the stories are teachings, wise teachings. Sometimes those are called wisdom books. Some of them are books of poetry, like the Psalms. The Lord is my shepherd. Those are all poems. And some of the books near the end of the Bible are actually letters. Letters that were written to all kinds of different churches. Because after Jesus died and rose again and his disciples and apostles went out to teach others about following Jesus, they started to form churches. And they didn't always stay with those churches. They would form the churches and then they'd go off to help other people form churches. And sometimes those churches were having a really hard time. Something would happen and they'd be having a tough time. And so the apostles or disciples or teachers would write them a letter and send it to them. And they would read the letter together and it would help them to figure out how to be followers of Jesus when they were having a tough time. And they would sometimes share that letter with other people. And the letter I want to talk about today is called 1 Peter. And if I asked you, who do you think wrote 1 Peter, you might say Peter. But it's not actually Peter at all. Back then, sometimes, if you wanted to write a letter to someone or write something, and you wanted people to know that it was something they could trust, it was like the writing that came from somebody else that they trusted, you would use their name. So the writer of 1 Peter knew that these churches, they remembered Peter. Peter was someone that they loved and trusted. And so he used Peter's name so that they would understand that what he was writing to them was good. It was something they could trust, something like what Peter would have written to them. And this wasn't weird at all back then. It was not like he was lying or something. This was something that people did all the time, and it was a good thing. And so we'll still call him Peter because it's a lot easier. But Peter wrote this letter to the church because they were having a really hard time. They were trying to follow Jesus and things were not going really well. People were angry at them. And so Peter wrote them this letter, and in it, he shared a couple of things about how they could grow and be healthy when they were going through some tough times. And I think lots of us are actually going through some pretty tough times right now. So maybe this letter from 1 Peter is a really good letter for us too. So Peter talks about two different ways that we can think about growing. One of them is how we grow when we're babies. And every single one of us has been a baby at one point. And Peter says that we should be like babies and long for the thing that makes babies grow and be happy. And what do you think the one thing is that babies need to eat to grow strong and healthy? The one thing. I bet you know it. Yep, it's milk. Babies need milk. You can't feed babies grass or carrots or hamburgers or lentils. None of those things are good for newborn babies. What newborn babies need most is milk. That's the one thing that's going to make them grow and be healthy. Now Peter said to the people, you've been taking in all kinds of things. Not eating them, but taking in meanness, unkindness, jealousy, hate, or gossip. They've been taking in all this stuff, and all that stuff isn't healthy for them. So they need to get rid of that. Instead of taking in that, they need to take in stuff that tastes like the goodness of God. And they need to take it in the way babies take in milk. They need to want it day and night. And the things that they're supposed to take in are things that taste like the goodness of God. And Maybe you could think of it like this. So in another letter in the Bible, there's a letter called Galatians. It's a letter to the church in Galatia. There's a list of things called the fruits of the Spirit. I don't know if you've heard of those before, but if you go to Galatians 5, I think it's near the end of the chapter, there's a list of the fruits of the Spirit. And they're things like goodness, kindness, patience, self-control, generosity, so giving freely, love, peace, all of those things will help you grow strong and healthy. And they're really helpful when you're feeling like things are pretty tough. They're going to help you out. The other way that Peter talked about growing is by thinking of building. I don't know if you have any blocks at your house. I have some blocks. You might have Lego. I loved Lego when I was little, but I don't have any Lego now. But Peter talked about us growing like we're building a building. And you could think of it like building a tower or a house for God. And he said when you're building, what you need to do is you need to remember the cornerstone. The cornerstone is the most important stone when you're building with stones. And the cornerstone was the very first stone that would get laid down when they were constructing something. And it was super important that that stone get placed really straight, perfectly straight and level, because every other stone that came after it, or brick, would line up with it. And that's how you'd end up with a building that was perfectly level and strong. And Peter said that every single one of us, we are like living stones, and our cornerstone is Jesus. So if we want to build, he called it a spiritual house, or a house for God's people, a house of love, God's love for everyone, we need to line ourselves up with Jesus, who is the cornerstone. Sometimes in the Bible they also talk about Jesus being the keystone. And if you're building an archway like this, you would put stones all the way up on both sides, and right in the middle there would be one stone that you put in last. And that stone's called the keystone, and it holds everything together. So Jesus is like our keystone. He holds us all together, or he's like our cornerstone. He keeps us strong and level. So Peter said when you're going through really difficult times, when everything feels like it's not quite right, you need to look to your cornerstone. Or you need to take in the food that's going to help you grow strong, like the fruits of the Spirit, like love and patience and kindness and goodness. Those things are going to keep us strong when things are tough. And maybe you could take some Play-Doh or clay and you could make your own cornerstone. And sometimes on cornerstones on buildings, they'll put the date on the cornerstone, they'll carve it in, or they'll carve in some important words. You could create a cornerstone and you could carve in Jesus' name. And then you could carve in anything else that makes you feel the goodness of God. Things like love and patience and kindness, generosity, giving. But it could also be things like hugs, or sunshine, or trees, or flowers, or riding your bike or your scooter. And you could either write the words onto your stone, or you could draw with something. You could carve it into the stone and draw the things that make you feel the goodness of God. Because those things that remind us of Jesus, those things that help us feel the goodness of God, those are the things that make us strong. Those are the things that help us to build a strong house for all of God's people. So that's what I wanted to share with you today about the letter 1 Peter. And before we go, I want to bless you. And if you're sitting with someone else, you can take your hand, your palm, and place it on their arm or their shoulder, or you can place your palm over your heart. May God bless you and keep you. May God's face shine on you and be gracious to you. And may the love of God flow over you and all around you and give you peace. And I will see you next Sunday.